Welcome back to another episode of the Hearse Chaser Podcast show. Today, we are talking about when grandma's estate becomes a minor mistake. All right. Many of my clients plan for their assets to go to their children. Well, if a child predeceases them, then it likely could go to a grandchild. And if that happens, it's a whole different ballgame. So we're going to talk about when minors receive assets, some plans, some safeguards that you can put in place to make sure that it is not a minor mistake, but it's a major help to make sure they are planned and protected for the future. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast.
You're listening to the Hearse Chaser Podcast show. Here's your host, Stephen McClellan.
Okay, so one of the episodes I recently put together was a devil's advocate position, which is why you should never do an estate plan. It was one of the hardest ones to do because it was against everything I believe in. But hopefully it was eye-opening to some folks who procrastinate or just haven't gotten around to do estate planning. This one is really helping people think beyond a very simplistic view of estate plan. What I mean by that is a lot of clients come into our office and say, it's simple. I have one kid. Or it's simple because I have 3 kids and they all get along. And then we start talking about that and I say, well, you're absolutely right. If everybody dies the way that they're supposed to, there should not be any issue at all. But the thing is, I and you, we don't have a crystal ball that tells us what the future holds. So it's impossible for me to say with certainty that when you die, your kids will be here. At the same time, if a child does predecease you, okay, I don't think you want to come back and see me, okay? That's not going to be fun for you or for me, so let's just walk through that analysis of what if a child predeceased you. So this episode focuses on minors receiving money, and I see it most common in 2 circumstances. Circumstance 1 is where mom and dad are in their 50s, and they're planning. I see a lot of almost empty nesters, or kids, maybe some kid in college, one not, and they want to leave their estate to their kids. You know, they may have a kid that's kind of out of college, but they may have a child or 2 that's still in high school or maybe junior high, and they're planning in that context. But I think the context that is more common is when grandma and grandpa leave money to a grandchild, or they left money to a child and the child died and it goes to their child, the grandchild. And so there is it's very different because that child, that minor, they haven't lived. They haven't experienced anything. And the number one concern is it doesn't matter how much money a grandkid gets. If they get $10,000, $100,000, or $1 million, when they get that money at 18, if they're still in high school and they've received $10,000 or $100,000, they will believe that they never have to work another day in their life. And that money can go really, really fast. So the challenge is, how do you prevent that? How do you put some safeguards in there? We're going to talk about some of those things, but I want you to realize first that this happens all the time. And the wisdom that grandma had, the wisdom that the adults have, children, minors haven't figured that out. In fact, statistically, they say that a male's brain does not fully develop until age 25. And as a male, I completely agree with that because I knew how I thought as a 22-year-old and a 23-year-old. And as a 40-year-old, I understand it. I get it. My understanding of people and myself is so much greater than when I was 22. And I wasn't terribly immature, I think I had a pretty good head on my shoulder always, but even still, I'm way wiser than I was in my 20s. And, as you know, some children blossom at different times in their life. And in that period of time between 18 and 25, one of the biggest challenges is who that minor or that young adult marries. Because your children or grandchildren can be just fine. If, however, they marry someone who isn't great, that grandchild can turn out to be not so grand. And I see that quite a bit. I will say personally, I was incredibly close to my grandparents. In fact, when I left my home state of Kansas to go to college in Tennessee, I made a point to call my grandparents nearly every single week. I can't remember the exact number, but it was hundreds, if not 1,000 phone calls that I made to them. And it was as good for them as it was for me. So if you're close to a grandchild, you understand how great it is to see them going on in life and pursuing things. And that's the thing I think the joy that my grandparents had was just to talk about what Stephen was doing and him going out and living life and moving on. For me, as a grandchild, it was helpful to hear my grandparents, whatever worry I had in life, they would always laugh. They had been through everything. They were born in the Depression. They had gone through wars, oil embargoes in the 70s, inflation in the 80s, recessions, all these things. And there was this sense that you're going to be all right. Life is going to go on. And so that connection between a grandparent and grandchild is so important. Not just the help raising of me, but even beyond that. When at I think it was my grandmother's funeral, the minister, when he was talking about my grandparents, he summarized it in this way, and it blew my mind because I thought, this is exactly right. He referred to, I think it was my grandmother, as the type of grandmother who was on the floor, on her knees, playing with her grandchildren. And I thought, oh, that was beautiful. I never thought of it that way. But she came, met us, and that relationship was very, very close. And many people thinking about their grandkids are very, very close to their grandchildren, and there's a sense of absolute love that you have. In fact, a lot of my clients have grandchildren. They say, I love seeing my grandkids in the driveway because it means they're either coming or going. Right? They don't have all the challenges that my wife and I have of changing all the diapers, getting them ready every day. It's just love, and they have so much energy for their grandkids. And when they leave, you can go to sleep, take a nap. So it's important to think that leaving something to them, whether it's a lot or a little, can have a huge impact on their life. So a couple realities. Here's some legal realities when it comes to minors. One of the biggest ones is property. They cannot hold title to real property. What's real property? We're talking about homes, farmland. So here's the thing. Here's the situation I see. Say there's a farmland, 100 acres, and you leave it to 3 kids, and 1 kid dies. Okay? Well, that kid dies, and now the minor children have an interest in the 100 acres. So when the aunt and uncle say, hey, we want to sell the 100 acres or sell the family home, well, everything is fine. Everything's agreeable, but when they go to sell the property, the title company says, wait a second, let me see, your brother died and he had 2 kids? Okay, are the kids 18? No, they're 16 and 15. title company says, well, we can't do this because technically your brother had an interest in this property and now his kids do. So we need to get a guardianship appointed for the minor kids to sell off on the home. And the family's like, what? Yes. So this is what happens because minors can't hold property. We have to get guardianships appointed and get the property approved. Whenever a minor owns real estate, you got to get approval to do that, and it becomes a big mess. And it's just it's a frustration because I get these calls and they're saying, hey, we're closing on Friday, and we're told we need to get a guardianship.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hearse Chaser Podcast show. Our mission is to be your first choice for last wishes. Want to dive deeper? Join us over at the Hearse Chaser Academy, where we've created 8 on-demand courses for each stage of life. From young adulthood to retirement, navigating separation or blended families, and everything in between, we help you plan for the future, no matter where you're at. Now stay with us as the ride continues on the Hearse Chaser Podcast show.
A couple of things to tell you. First, if you ever sell property, there's going to be, in our state, it's a title company. In other states, I think attorneys do it. But have them call a week in advance and say, have you worked up that file? I see so many times that title companies will work a file like a day before and realize that they don't have something, and it delays the sale. Just a little tip. So if you ever have a situation where there's like more than one person that has a right to this property, make sure that you maybe call that title company a week before. Say, hey, is everything lined up? Or have the real estate agent say, hey, have you looked at this? Because everybody wants things to go smooth, and the minor kid is often a hiccup, okay, on that estate if it's necessary. Well, when that happens, of course, the home and the assets for that minor kid now become public record, and it includes the court, and it's expensive, and that money is overseen by the court until that child turns 18. So that can be expensive, and you don't want that. I see that, like if I had a last will and testament, if that's all I had and I died and everything went to my kids, then it would be public record how much my kid receives, which, I think the world probably knows enough about me, probably knows enough about my kids already. They don't need that particular number publicized. Okay, so there's you got to be careful how you set things up, and I think I'm gonna talk about the solution, kind of what I'd recommend, but it's if it's controlled by the courts, then there's not really good instructions on maybe what you would want as a parent or a grandchild, as a parent or a grandparent. Okay, so at 18, it's theirs, and they can do what they want to with it. But I think we all agree it's probably not a good idea for grandkids to get the money at 18. So someone estimated that there is over $5.6 billion of inheritance that is for minors that is being held by state. So this is a problem around the U.S. that people are not planning for minors. 35% of guardianship cases, they complain about the lack of delays, lack of clarity, and how funds can be accessed. I get that. It's kind of a mess, and you feel like a judge is overseeing things. One of the biggest concerns is if money does go to a grandchild, the most common person to be guardian for that money is going to be the surviving parent, which is either a son-in-law or daughter-in-law. Okay? Now, I'll tell you straight up, I don't like that. Okay, so in my context with 3 daughters, if one of them dies and money goes to grandchildren, that would mean a son-in-law is managing the money for my grandkid. And I don't like this, okay, because most young men are going to remarry. very quickly, in fact, and I don't want them to control the money. I don't want them to have any control over that. What I would want is my other daughters, that would be the aunts if they were over 18, or someone I trust to manage money for the grandchild. So that's a big, big reason to plan for making sure the money stays in the family, controlled by aunts and uncles or people you designate, and not son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. I get really kind of passionate about that. Only 26% of grandparents include grandchildren in their estate plans. Of my 4 grandparents, one of them left. So that plays out true in my own family. Even though 75% say they want to leave a legacy to their grandchildren. There's a great quote. I don't know if you're religious or not. I try to not get into that topic too much, but there's a quote in Proverbs that blessed is the man who gives to his children's children. I really like that quote. It's a good thing. A lot of times you've helped out your your children, and now helping out grandchildren. So, what is some practical advice? So, first thing is, I don't think you should leave the money directly to minors. Life insurance or bank accounts. I think it is best to leave assets in a trust. That's what we've done for our family. How that works is, instead of the money going directly to the child or grandchild who's a minor, it goes into a trust managed by someone. And we have rules. We have conditions about how and when they get the money. For example, what's really common is ours, for example, says our kids get half at 25 and the remainder at 30. But they can have the money early for college, trade school, medical needs, or anything in the discretion of the trustee. So there's flexibility if they need to go to college. If they need a car for college, I think that falls under discretion. But the idea clearly is that they're not to get everything at age 18 or 19. I've had some clients go a lot further and put restrictions, like they only get the money if they maintain a certain GPA. Some folks have put language in there that if money goes to a granddaughter, they wanted, a certain amount of money reserved for a wedding, because they assumed that that might be a hardship for that granddaughter. If their son dies and money goes to the granddaughter, they want to make sure that that granddaughter has money for that wedding. So you can put any kind of restrictions. Perhaps drugs and alcohol are a concern too. They could be tested before they receive the money, and I typically like, I think it's fingernail test. I think they go back 3 months. Like a urine test is like only good for a few days. So I think hair and nails, you want that. So whether the trust pays for that or the kid pays for that, that's kind of helpful in case you have those concerns. If they go to jail, they get nothing. If they're being sued in bankruptcy, you want to put language in there because things can happen when they're young. And you have to, in today's world, the last thing about minor grandchildren is you have to be clear about the blended families. So normally, descendants means blood. So if your son or daughter had 2 kids and they married and that spouse had 2 kids, there's 4 kids there. And you probably look at all grandchildren equally. But if you don't plan for it, it might just go to your biological grandchildren, not the step grandchildren. So you got to be very clear on what do you mean by grandchild. I often include language that grandchild means any adopted. So if they adopt some kids, you can put that in there. It's best, I think, if you decide to leave some money to your grandkids, the question I get is, how much should I leave for grandkids? So being a former grandchild, I'm not anyone's grandchild now, which is kind of a weird phase to be in. I have a couple thoughts for you. A lot of times grandchildren will live out of state. So if you can leave them at least $1,000 or so, it kind of helps them to travel back for funerals, to get hotels. I think that's a consideration that most grandparents don't think about. Often if they have a bigger family, it's very expensive. Every time we went back home to Kansas for a trip, it was a lot of money. And a lot of grandchildren, if they're starting out their family, they don't have a lot of disposable income when they're starting a family, have kids. So just putting a little bit can be helpful. I've seen 1,000, I've seen 5,000, 10,000 for grandkids. I like fixed amounts versus a percentage. So if you say the grandkids get 25% of everything, that makes it kind of difficult because then it's 25% of everything, like personal property. And I think sometimes it's easier just to leave a fixed amount for the grandkids. So I think that's probably a good place to end. I think it's great to leave money to grandkids. I think you have to use some wisdom. The last thing I will tell you, sometimes money is not the objective, but leaving a memento. If you go to my website at McClellanFirm.com, I have a great tribute to my grandparents who left me a family violin. So you go watch that video. It makes me cry. If you want a good cry, definitely go watch that. What I mean by that is when Grandma and Grandpa are gone, sometimes the closest thing to that person is something that they touched, whether it was a gun, a fishing pole, a pen, dishes, and they become very sentimental. So leaving those things to grandkids, I think, are important as well. And for me, it was the violin, but what was really special about it is the note that my grandfather wrote to me. And he didn't write very much. He was a farmer. So him giving me that note and his wishes for me and for my daughter are beautiful. So sometimes it's not about the money. Sometimes it's just about the memento that you leave behind and just saying that you love Grandma and Grandpa. That's probably a good place to end because if I keep talking about it, I'll tear up just like I do every time I watch that video. So thanks for being on this special episode of the Hearse Chaser Podcast show. Plan for your kids, but don't forget about your grandkids. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hearse Chaser Podcast show. Please remember, you can't outrun a hearse, but you can leave your family with a smooth ride.